ecosystems, understanding linkages to advance public health and conservation outcomes in policy and practice. If you didn't already notice, we do have some snacks and drinks in the back, and of course I will, you expect me to encourage you to come sit a little closer to the front of the room if you'd like. Just to give you a little bit of a background on this session here, this session was brought a accumulation of 3 proposals that were initially submitted to the conference organizers. So what we're going to have is 3 different presentations on the use of nature to maintain and strengthen human health, and vice versa, the use of health to strengthen or maintain environmental outcomes. And how these are realized are through the HEAL project, which you'll hear more about. HEAL stands for Health and Ecosystems Analysis of Linkages. You'll also hear about PHE programs, which stand for Population Health Environment Programs. And you'll hear a little bit about CBD, or the Convention on Biological Diversity. To give you some context, CBD has more of an international or national level focus. HEAL is more national, regional or local, and then PHE projects are even more local than the ones referenced through HEAL. So we're going to describe the different initiatives and outline the linkages between them, but also talk a bit about their differences. For example, the unique ways they may tackle different problems. You heard a little bit about PHE addressing climate change in the video that you just saw. And then we'll conclude with an audience discussion on these issues of nature and health, while drawing out unique strengths of all the approaches. I want to turn your attention now to the different speakers. We're going to have Jean-Christophe get us started in a few minutes. He's with IUCN. We're then going to turn it over to Carla Ingram from Wildlife Conservation Society. Then I will present, and my name is Sandeep Badala, and I am with the Environmental Change and Security Program of the Woodrow Wilson International Center for Scholars in Washington, D.C., and that is quite a mouthful. And then we'll have Gildres Andre Malala from Blue Ventures, a PHE project in Madagascar, present towards the end. So that's what we're going to look at doing today. So I'll turn it over to Jean-Christophe to get us started with.
Okay. Good evening. Sorry, we have to compete with the governor reception. So maybe, given that we have a very small number, maybe you could get to the front unless it's okay. So that's the first thing. If you're fine where you are, that's okay. Second thing, does anyone need interpretation? Do you want French, Korean, Spanish interpretation? Which language?
Spanish.
Spanish. We need Spanish. Do we need Korean? Korean, and I guess we don't need French. I'm the only French here, and I speak in English, so that's okay. Okay, so thank you. If I can. So my name is Jean-Christophe Vier. There's an accent, but I mean the informatics doesn't allow this small sign on it. I'm the Deputy Director of this Global Species Program of IUCN. So I'm based in Switzerland. I'll explain a little bit about what I do. And I mean, you're here, you're familiar with IUCN. Basically, there is the Secretariat, people like me, paid by IUCN. They are the members. Many of you are members of IUCN, representative of member organization. And we are also working with the Species Survival Commission. And I work very closely with the Species Survival Commission, and in particular one of our specialist group, which is the one FS specialist group. So basically, I'm going to talk about linkages between biodiversity and health in the broad sense. That will be the first part of my talk, and the second one I'll introduce will be the one FS specialist group, and that will be the second part and what they do. So how can I need to press?
Yes.
Okay, sorry. Sorry, didn't know about that. Okay, and here I put my titles not just to show off. It's just because I'm a veterinary background and I moved into conservation. I'm not anymore a vet, but I have some remainings from my vet time ago. And I was asked basically by the one FS specialist group to give the presentation. So they they pre-cooked a few things for me, but I added a few others, my perspective as well. So as you see, and there are things when you look at the link with biodiversity and various problems, I mean, one of the key reference for us comes from, I mean, our knowledge, and a lot of the knowledge comes from the red list of threatened species. And it comes also from our network. So this is, for example, the Species Survival Commission, which is a key provider of information on biodiversity. This is the logo of all our specialist groups. We have 120, some of them. And so it's a huge resource. Maybe some of you are a member of the Species Survival Commission. So it's a huge resource. And I'd like your attention to this one among many of them, the Wildlife Health Specialist Group. And the reason I show that slide is because we have one dedicated group to wildlife health, but this group needs to make many connections with all these other groups which are dealing with birds, primates, reintroductions, captive breeding, and so forth. So it's what we call an interdisciplinary group. Just to come back to the knowledge of some basic facts we can extract from the red list. We know there are key drivers to biodiversity loss, and I listed the 5 of them. It's no surprise to you, you know all of these. Land use, basically habitat destruction, overexploitation, invasive species, pollution, and climate change. Let's say they are the 5 biggest ones. If you look at that, for example, the number of species which are threatened by all these things, habitat loss come first. So here you have the number of threatened species on the x-axis and the different kind of threats strategized here. So I know we're talking about health in broad sense, but that's what impacts biodiversity. One thing we have been seeing over the years is basically wild animals are increasingly threatened by diseases, and particularly emerging pathogens. So draw to your attention that we tend to see, many people tend to see health as just a human problem, but actually many species are impacted by species. I mean, avian flu is one on wild birds, chytrid fungus on amphibians, Ebola on gorillas, or facial tumor disease for Tasmanian devil. So when we also talk about health, we tend to think about diseases, but health in a much broader sense. Health, I mean, comes from our food, so what comes from the sea, what comes from hunting and bushmeat, what comes from crop wild relatives, from agriculture, which is largely dependent on biodiversity. Biodiversity and clean air and water is also a key link between biodiversity and health. Medicine, we tend to forget that, so that's something we want to put on the table, quite a holistic approach when we talk about that. Nature provides drugs, which are quite precious to us, and these tends to be sometimes left on the side. And also, when we talk about medicine or health, it's not only just drugs, it's also, I mean, all this landscape and cultural sites, all this value, which is good for our health as well. So we tend to forget that as well. So actually, in 2005, the Millennium Ecosystem Assessment put that in a much more robust way. You're probably familiar with all these linkages. Basically, I mean, this is not just our perception, it's actually an intergovernmental study, 700 of experts agreeing that health, you can see the arrows, health is benefiting from provisioning services, regulating services, and cultural services provided by biodiversity. One thing which is important is, which we come also from the red list, is some species are also used for food, but also for medicine. So we conducted some analysis and looked at the species, for example, used for food or medicine. And these are, for example, what happened to the birds over the years. Some birds are used for food, so it's not strictly medicine, but mostly food. So this is what we call the red list index. So when you have the line, the lower the line, the more threatened the group is, and the steeper the curve. I mean, the decline in these species is greater as well. So we've split, for example, birds into different categories. The ones which are used for food and medicine, the ones which are not, and we put all the birds. So in red, you have actually the birds used for food and medicine, and it comes very, clearly that what we use for food and medicine is more threatened than what is not, and than other birds. That's the same for mammals. Mammals use, and you can multiply that, it's the same for amphibians. So what has been used in particular for medicine, which is very important for health and for people around the world, is actually more threatened than the rest. Just write the attention, because also when we talk about health, humans, we do things to tackle the problem which create problem on biodiversity. So there are, a growing number of examples of toxic products we're using. Maybe the more striking example is what we use as an anti-inflammatory drug, which has caused a decline in vultures, 90%. So all these 3 species are critically endangered, and one of them being the most abundant species of birds. So there are different sides of the coins when we talk about biodiversity and health. Sometimes by tackling health, we aggravate the problem to biodiversity. We know the problem with hormones, antibiotics, other anti-parasite drugs, for example. So that's not something I'm going to expand. I'm going to focus on diseases, but that's things to keep in mind. So when we come back to diseases, that's an analysis that's been done by EcoHealth Alliance. This is done over the last 60 years based on peer-reviewed literature. So there was a review of 450 outbreak events and an analysis of what are the drivers leading to emergence of disease in humans. And you can see that's the reason why I show the first slides about what caused biodiversity loss. You can see that there are real similarity between what drives the emergence of diseases in humans and what caused biodiversity declines, in particular land use changes, habitat destruction, for example. Food industry changes or agricultural practices. We know that's a major impact on biodiversity, but you can see that's also the results that also results in many outbreaks in diseases. Of course, food-related disease outbreak. The third one is actually human susceptibility. It's mostly about HIV and this kind of diseases, which has probably not much to do directly with biodiversity, but you can see that the two causes of diseases and habitat destruction are quite similar. And you can break down all these different drivers. That's another way to show these different drivers: land use changes, agriculture, and you can see that around the world, actually, the drivers are quite different. You can see that agriculture has a big impact in the Americas, for example, but look, in the middle of Africa, Central Africa, bushmeat is a real driver. Consumption of bushmeat is a real driver of in emergence of diseases. We need to recognize that nowadays, so emerging infectious disease, most of them are zoonotic, affecting humans and animals. 50% of non-human pathogen, and I think there's something like 1,400 are zoonotic. 73% of emerging human pathogen are zoonotic, and most originate in wildlife. Not only wildlife, I'll come back to that, but it's quite a striking number. So, it doesn't make sense to decouple what's happening to wildlife and biodiversity in general to the health problem happening in human. And the rate of disease outbreaks increase. That's a study that was what is in preparation, provided to me by Billy Karesh for EcoHealth Alliance. So what it shows here is the species genera, which has more than one virus in common with humans. So you could see in the blue bar, so you have all the species genera. So for example, the first one is the chimpanzee. You have the second one being sheep, domestic sheep. Third one being, I cannot read, but you have the goats. You have, so there was this kind of analysis. So you can see the bar, and the green bars are actually corrected by done to correct the sample bias. So for example, domestic animals have been extraordinarily well studied over the years. So you have plenty of of studies, and you increase the chance to isolate virus which are in common with which are shared with humans. So they corrected actually these, and you can see that actually the spectrum is different, and the 10 species, the pictures you see are actually the top of the green bars. So for example, the one, just to explain how it works, the gray bar here with this rodent at the top, there was one study to look at for one virus in common. So that's what it means. That doesn't mean that there are many more viruses, but it means that many things are probably understudied, and we will discover many new viruses. So you can see that primates, rodents, and bats are really sharing a significant number of viruses with us. So I just come back to that, to the fact that disease are also impacting species biodiversity. I just mentioned that before. But just take an example about rabies and wildlife. So you can see the number of species which are susceptible to rabies. And actually, some of them are quite threatened. And if you take the example of the wild dog or the Ethiopian wolf, these are really seriously impacted by rabies. Another thing to take in mind is a few things are going to happen, and climate change is going to change a little bit the picture. So this is a modeling scenario for the distribution of Nipah virus. So for those who don't know, Nipah virus provide encephalitis in humans, and in most cases are fatal. So people die, 100% mortality more or less. So here, and this disease is transmitted by bats, by fruit bats of a specific genus, Pteropus. So in green, you have, where the disease happens now. So there are a few emerging outbreaks from time to time, mostly in South Asia and Southeast Asia. So what they did, again, EcoHealth Alliance, they tried to model these different scenarios. What is likely to happen with different climate change scenarios. So in red, you have what's the niche? How can I say that? Adequate niche for the virus. So there are some probabilities to have the virus in the future in these different places around the world. Not sure the vector, the bats will be there, but if you have the combination of the right niche for the species plus the species happen in this place, you have the possibility to have outbreaks in this region. So just that to illustrate that climate change is going to change basically the distribution of species, and maybe we create new outbreaks in new places. One key thing which is playing an important role in disease emergence is the wildlife trade. We know that animals are completely crowded. They are probably immune deficient. People mix species and they ship them around the world. So nothing better than to spray diseases around the world. So what we try to do is we need to, and I hope it was convincing enough, but I'm sure you're convinced already, we need to really integrate health into conservation in a more systematic way. So we did that somewhat through the Convention on Biological Diversity and the Aichi targets, the Strategic Plan for Biodiversity for the next decade. So this needs to be really, we need to go through to policies which are which have a stronger impact, and we need to actually work on this integration much more. And one thing we can work with is this Aichi target 14. So that's how it is by 2020, ecosystem that provide essential services, including services related to water, and contribute to health. So that's actually the only place where health is mentioned in the strategic plan for biodiversity. And we are working on that linkages with the Convention on Biological Diversity. What is also important is also to develop wildlife health surveillance around the world in order to predict where outbreaks could happen and also to control the risk. So what happens is usually you have a silent circulation of pathogens at the bottom. which may create some die-off, which may not be noted. So suddenly you have a spillover, you have new human infection, you have localized emergence, so that's what we have with Nipah virus, Ebola virus, and because of trade and basically travels, you suddenly spread that to the world, and some diseases, it happened already. So if we want to be efficient, we need to work really at the lower level. That's the most cost-effective way to work. So I come to this specialist group, which is chaired by Billy Karish and Richard Koch, one being with in the US, one in the UK, and they are what they do here as for IUCN. They are a group within IUCN, and their role is to serve as a first response for wildlife health concerns around the world. In fact, what they do most of the time, so they can convene some meetings, some processes like what we do with CBD, so they are the voice of IUCN in these processes, and they provide technical advice to IUCN, but also to anyone that needs any technical advice. This is about the membership they have at the moment. So I'm one of these 300 plus. So that's a distribution in green. So the intent is